This is not the first time we talk about Azure costs on this channel, controlling Microsoft Azure spend. But today we want to focus specifically on what team leads can do about it, not practitioners, although I can hardly imagine Stefan not falling into the rabbit hole of explaining about certain virtual machines. But let's try and keep the focus of today's conversation strictly around team leads, department heads, C-level. Stefan, correct me if I'm wrong. I'll pass the mic to you. This is your show, but I'll promise I will interrupt you sometimes with to ground the questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a quick introduction for those who's never been on this channel and why we talk about it. I'm not going to hide it. We are a company that does this, but we also a YouTube channel that also just talks about practical approaches. You'll find hundreds of videos on this channel about different aspects of Microsoft licensing, Microsoft costs, Microsoft negotiations. So feel free to stay. I don't invite you to subscribe, but I'm sure everyone who's interested in this will find something for themselves. And I'm the CEO of the company called SumExpert, and Stefan is the CTO of the new project called SumCloud, which we'll soon announce. So, Stefan, the microphone is with you.
Thank you, Sasha. What I would like to talk about today is how you, as a person in a leadership position, can ask the right questions to figure out if your cloud is running absolutely perfectly tailored to precision to what you actually need. So basically like a nice dress, or if your cloud is the average one. The Flexera State of the Cloud report points this one out year after year after year. Self-assessments, people see that they have probably somewhere between 28 and 32% cloud waste in their estate. And this is something which we see in the engagements which we are doing. So I do have conversations with people who are of the strict belief that there is no waste in their cloud environment, but then you start asking the first few questions and you get the answers. You figure out that there actually is some waste in there. I think one of the issues is, and this is just human nature, if you have been responsible for building the cloud over years, you're of course reporting figures, you're reporting cost increases, and you always have to give reason to them and basically say, yep, we do this correctly. We actually have cloud costs figured out. Trust me, boss. Trust me, sir. And then it's pretty hard to go back on this one once you have learned new things, which we teach in this channel here, and actually kind of admit that, well, there is waste in there after all. Sorry, sir. And this is, I think, a big leadership and also cultural challenge to help the people who know about the skeletons in your closet, about the inefficiencies, about the optimization potential, to voice it, bring that one forward, and then build a company culture which celebrates these kinds of initiatives. Because if there is a blaming culture, like, why did you do it wrong? Why did we waste so much money on that? You're not going to hear about anything on that. And the cloud is so easy to hide, or in the cloud, it is so easy to hide these things because it is so damn complex. I can easily hide 30% waste in the cloud without it rearing its ugly head anywhere. But on the other hand, if we can all work together, asking the right questions, building the right culture on how we can expose that one and then address it with initiatives, then this is a tremendous savings potential which you as a lead can unlock. And it won't come from your engineers because they don't have the time to fight the battle for you. You actually have to do the initiative there. Now, if I take this a little further, just taking an example, an accelerated cloud migration. When you are just having a few years, a year or two, to move your entire data center into the cloud, you are working against a deadline. There may already be contracts terminated. Any extension that you sign with your existing data center provider or with your existing facility is going to cost you a ton of money. People will hit this deadline. But do you think that they will apply all the potential optimizations, right sizings, modernization levers which are out there Probably not. They will move things in, and especially if you're dealing with thousands of virtual machines, tens of thousands of disks, backups for all that, other storage accounts, databases, whatnot, you can bet that once something has been migrated over, it stays that way. There is no time to revisit 6 months later, a year later, 1.5 years later. And even if people are picking up more experience as they move into the cloud, they are beginning to use more modern resources instead of the initial ones, which they picked for the first sets of waves. Nobody has usually the time for that. And then you continue your daily operations in the cloud, everybody having a full backlog, everybody trying to make the next delivery on time, get the patch waves through, do all the operational work. This is the thing that we see. There is a lot of value buried in your existing estate, but people do not have the bandwidth, the time, and the priority to go looking after these. And this again is something which a leader can make happen, because the leader can give priority. There can be a after action report. There can be a revisiting of things which were built in the past, where maybe now new knowledge exists. And then you can help your teams go chase after that one.
So I think with every question, there are a few aspects about each question. So when do you ask that question? Whom do you ask that question? And also, what's the point I was making? I was trying to make. Where do you find the time to actually press that pause button? Maybe not press that pause button, but actually interrupt the what you just described as ongoing requirements and meeting the targets and improving productivity of the apps. We all do the same the same exact mistakes all the time. We keep housekeeping on the backlog. Later, one day I need to actually sort out my downloads when there are 4,000 files in the downloads folder. I need to sort out my virtual machines that are not upgraded. The first layer is to learn which questions to ask, which you already talking about. The second question is, who asks these questions and whom do they ask and when, and actually finding that right time and the right cadence is probably not least important. So I would love you to kind of not just point at a particular problem and what question to ask, but also give practical recommendations to the viewers around how to actually make this work. Famously, the people who wrote GTD, Getting Things Done, after a while had to write the second book, which is called Making It All Work.
Yeah, making it happen, making it work is indeed a big one. But before you can even set up some optimization initiative, you actually need to know if there is something to optimize for in your environment in the first place. And from all the cost optimization engagements, we find that the most pivotal team to understand optimization potential and then also to drive a good percentage of this is your cloud ops team. So my recommendation would be have a talk with your cloud ops lead. If this is literally the one person who has been given the responsibility for your cloud environment, or if this is a team of 5, 10, whatever number of people, have a conversation with this person who you have given the responsibility for your cloud estate. Doesn't matter if it's Azure, if it's AWS, if it's GCP. The basic setups, the basic rules, the basic questions you can ask are more or less the same for all of these clouds. There are a few differences, and I will point them out. But you can use this as canaries to get an idea if you potentially are wasting money in the cloud or not. And one of the questions that you can ask, which simply applies to all of the clouds, is for all the compute services we are using. And compute service are your virtual machines, they are your app service plans or your web servers. Several other services also count towards that. What percentage do we have under a reservation or a savings plan? So for how much do we have a commitment and how much do we consume pay as you go? Just give me the numbers, please. This is something that can be pretty easily pulled from your cloud cost data. Each of the cloud portals provides some cost management functionality, which allows you to show what kind of your cost is on pay as you go, what is under a commitment of some form. And I would say if the number is not 60, 70% coverage, and not 80, 90% utilization of the reservations you purchase is another interesting question, by the way, to ask, because especially with reservations or maybe with an oversized savings plan, you can run in a position where you're actually not fully consuming that. These are two KPIs to simply ask the question, which is pretty easy to answer. And to give you a benchmark, what you should be aiming for, you should be aiming for above 90% of coverage. So from your compute cost, around 90% should be covered with some form of a commitment. Unless you're heavily using Databricks, for example, that's a workload which is not really working with commitments, as you spin up a lot of systems for a short amount of time and then you bring them all back down. This is compute cost which you cannot really optimize that way. But for your 24/7 servers running day in, day out, they basically should have a commitment in place. 1-year reservations, 3-year reservations, savings plan, anything is good. And then the utilization of the commitments which you have purchased should be in the high 90%. If the numbers are lower, then you have your first canary saying we are probably paying more for our cloud usage than we should.
So we have multiple methods to, let's talk about Azure, but AWS is, they sort of mirror each other, not 100%, but you can find similar offerings. So in Azure, we have reservations, the most traditional thing. We have savings plans, and we also have savings of the Mac consumption commitments. How do those KPIs? So you called a few numbers, but let's reiterate them. What we should be looking at on each and every such saving tool in terms of utilization. You called 60 to 70% should go through some sort of commitments or savings plans, and reservation should ideally be 90% plus utilized. To be honest, I mean, to me, it sounds like if they're not 100% utilized, then we have a psychological problem of which is by the way addressed by professional billing people. Let me explain because it's difficult to understand without the explanation. If you look deeply inside mobile phone tariffs, what you'll find is that they are designed in a way where even with the all-you-can-eat calls and text and whatnot and internet, we usually overpay because the authors, the people who create such plans, they create them in a way where it's more tempting to take for peace of mind something a little bit more expensive, but where you will never go into the pay-as-you-go territory. And we see this in the cloud and other consumption commitments as well, where organizations overcommit just in case, and then they end up in a situation where they actually have to chase that commitment, even if they don't need it. They start, inventing new projects, new things that they may not even need, but it's kind of painful to see that the commitment is not being used. So I know I packed a few questions into one, so let's try and take it apart, Stefan.
Yeah. So let's maybe start with the big one, which is forcing your hand in your strategy for a longer period, because this again is something where leadership is required. As if you just lead it then to the people to burn through consumption, they will find ways to burn through consumption and set you up with a huge amount of waste. This is the MEC. And there are, of course, comparable means on AWS and GCP where you commit to your cloud provider to consume, let's say, $30 million over the next 3 years for a nice, simple $10 million a year. If this is size too big, it is too aspirational. You were, for example, thinking that the big migration will happen in year one, and then the migration only happens in year three, and you are falling behind your consumption targets. You will still be charged the full amount. And while you have, at least on the Azure side, I can speak to this one, a 12 months grace period to burn through your credits. So anything which you cannot consume on your Mac at the end of your Mac term is going to be converted into credits, which you can then still spend on the first party Azure services. No longer on third party services, no longer on Azure Marketplace purchases. By the way, Azure Marketplace is a topic which we should address also one of these days, Sasha, maybe for another live, not for today. But that can set you up in a direction where you're then all of a sudden trying to find new ways of spending money on Azure. And then there's no incentive at all to optimize and to save. So Mac is something which you need to approach strategically. We already had a session about this one. And basically the story is to try to size your initial Mac smaller than you think it's going to be. Yes, you may lose 1 or 2% of rebates from Microsoft, but chasing these final 2% rebates, which put you at risk of maybe having to burn a few million at the end of your Mac commitment, hardly ever pays off in our experience. And we do indeed see companies overcommitting and then being in a spending frenzy, especially when the first half of the Mac period is over. So let's move this one aside. If you already signed to bigger Mac, then this is just something that you have to live with and manage with, and we can help you with that. But let's assume that you actually are incentivized to do cost optimizations. Now, unless you have achieved an outstanding high rebate through the Mac on your pay-as-you-go consumption, what we see at the moment is usually something between 5% and 15% rebates on the pay-as-you-go cost. That means that any reservation you do is usually more than halving the cost of the resource which you are reserving. So this is why I'm saying do not try to get 100% utilization out of that, because a 3-year reservation gives you about 60% rebate versus the retail rate, so the non-discounted rate. If you have a 20% Mac discount, your rebate is only going to be 40%. So then it's a little bit less impactful. But let's say it's about able to halve the cost of your virtual machine. That means if you have a few reservations too many, you're only paying 50 cents on the dollar for these excess reservations. If you had too few reservations and you have to do a lot of pay-as-you-go, you're actually paying 100 cents on the dollar because there is only this minimal rebate on pay-as-you-go. So this is why I usually advocate to reserving maybe a little bit more than what you need. Setting the savings plan maybe a little bit higher, because when it's not catching resources because you use too much, then you are always defaulting to the pay-as-you-go rate. And the pay-as-you-go rate tends to be anywhere between 80 and 95 cents on the dollar, while the reserved rate is usually around 40 cents on the dollar, and the savings plan rate is around 50 cents on the dollar. And if you see it like this, it's actually a good way to say, hey, let's see what we can get as good as possible coverage. And low 90% are usually feasible in a cloud environment for what you can put under a reservation or under a savings plan. And then let's see what we can at least get into the mid to high 90% on the utilization, that we do not have a lot of the things running empty, running unutilized. But you also need to make the trade-off how much time you want to invest in the reservation minigame, where you're continuously exchanging the reservations as your systems change, as you modernize things, as you onboard new workloads, as you move things between regions, as you upgrade virtual machines, etc. There's always a bit of housekeeping to do to keep the reservations in sync. And what I'm saying is, as long as they are kept reasonably in sync, you tend to save a lot of money. I very often see people not keeping it in sync at all, and then 1 year down the road, your reservations only have 70% utilization. So you're effectively paying for a whole lot of commitment, which no longer finds systems to apply itself to. And then you definitely need to tidy up. So if you have a coverage, even if it's a lower coverage, buying a few more reservations is a great idea. If you have low utilization, this is basically anything below 80%, you should definitely plan in a optimization round where you are revisiting what is my current workload, What do I have reserved? Where is the difference between the two? And then to update your reservations to again match your workloads. And this is something where you have excellent means in Azure because you can basically exchange any and all old compute reservations for the new ones. You basically hand in whatever you don't need anymore and you buy new stuff. As long as the new stuff you buy has a same or higher value than what
Same
you hand back,
value.
you can just do a free exchange. There's no hard commitment to stick with them. In AWS, it depends on what kind of a reservation you purchase. There is interchangeable reservation and there are non-interchangeable ones. So this is a little bit more stringent than Azure. And on GCP, you basically are locked into what you reserved. So then you have to live with it. And then you rather have to manage that if you bought a certain reservation and your workloads start to drift away from that, you may need to manage your workloads back onto the family which you reserved so that you're not paying twice. Again, these are all the kinds of leadership questions you can ask. How well are we using our reservations? How much is covered by reservations in the first place? And it should be high numbers, especially on Azure, where you have excellent exchange options.
Okay, so we've established what the question to ask and what to look for. How difficult is it for a decision maker to find it themselves or ask somebody on, if they ask somebody on the team, do the platforms provide that information like ready to read, or is it doesn't take time to actually dig through and understand that? So what can I do? Okay, imagine I'm a C-level, CTO level person, CIO level person, because I hardly can imagine CFO digging that truth. If I don't want to call you, Stefan, what should I do?
You should ask your cloud lead, how much of my cost is linked to a commitment discount?
Great.
That's the focus field, which says there's a reservation or a savings plan or any of the other many means which the cloud gives you behind that. And me already having to enumerate tells you that it's a losing battle to go on the nerd level. And unfortunately, the cloud portals, they are built from nerds for nerds. It's just something that you have to accept. There is not a casual user interface, at least none which I am aware of, which on you sign in and you click on one thing and then you see the KPIs which you're interested in. They are there. They are buried somewhere. Some clouds you only have to click 7 times, and other clouds you only need to click 5 times to get to the right place, but you need to know where to click through. And then maybe you got your scope wrong and it's only showing you the wrong subscription and not all of the accounts and not this billing profile and whatnot. So leave this to the nerds, leave this to the cloud ops people, leave this to the people who are doing your financial reporting for the cloud, and simply ask KPI style questions. How much of my compute spend has a commitment discount associated with it? That's a simple question which they can pull out of the Azure, AWS, GCP cost management, and they can simply give you a number. We are spending $1 million per month on compute, and $500,000 of this one goes against the commitment discount. So hey, half of this is covered, half of this is not. Why is the other half not covered? Let's talk about that one. What is keeping you guys from buying more reservations? Is there anything in the process which is making it hard? Have you been told that there is right now something in the budgeting and you can no longer make a 1 year or 3 year commitment of company funds? Because that in the end of the day is what you're doing with these reservations. You basically tell the cloud provider, I herewith sign this contract saying I'm going to use these resources for the next 12 or 36 months. Maybe the person who bought the reservations in the past made a mistake, then has been told off, and now is no longer daring to buy new reservations. So your process broke. Maybe. It's your job as a leader really to figure this one out, and you can start with the KPIs. We have given you numbers where they should be, where they often are. So we often see 30, 50% coverage, 70 to 80% utilization. If the numbers look like this, you have to act. Then your house is not in order. I have another canary for you, unless you want to dig a little deeper into this one, Sasha.
No, let's move on to the next question.
So the next question is specific to the Microsoft Azure cloud because AWS and GCP have different rules there. And this is, you can ask the question, how much are we paying for Windows Server licenses in Azure? When you are running your Azure service, there are two options. If it's a Windows VM or any Windows-based service, how you can license it. You can do license included. It's basically SPLA for hyperscalers. And this is what you have to do when you're in AWS and on GCP, unless I missed something recently changing in the Microsoft product terms, but I guess not. So there you have to pay, as a rough number, about 250 US dollars for 8 cores for a Windows Server license to run this in the cloud. In the Azure cloud, there's the same option, which has the same price. So Azure is competitive on this one, on this level. It's basically the same license included price across all the three major hyperscalers. But what Azure offers you, and only Azure does, is the so-called Azure Hybrid Use benefit that allows you to take your server and cloud enrollment or otherwise procured Windows Server licenses with software assurance and to tell the Azure cloud, hey, I already own a license. Depending on what your SCE contract looks like, that can be a fraction, or that will be a fraction of the cost. The biggest rebate we have ever seen in a client setup so far was a 95% reduction of a perpetual Windows Server license, which was only costing the software assurance part compared to the license included feature. That customer had about 70% of the virtual machines running with Azure Hybrid Use benefit, and 30% were on license included. When we asked why the remaining 30% were on license included, it was basically a breakdown in communication, nobody taking a decision at the time, people not exactly understanding the questions behind that one, some concerns being voiced about, hey, we don't fully have our license counting Microsoft compliance process under control. So we rather go with the safe option, which is license included, because when you get the license from the cloud, you don't need to worry about being properly licensed, getting audited by Microsoft. So you see where it takes a lot of worry away from the people, but you pay for this worry with a lot of money from the company. So actually, the answer of how much are we paying for Windows licenses in Azure should be zero, or a very, very, very small percentage of your total spend on virtual machines. There's one VM family, the burstable ones, where it's likely better to pay the Windows license fees. And again, to give you a concrete ask you can pose to your cloud ops lead is to ask for all the virtual machines which have Windows or Windows licenses in their charge description.
So
this is a sum. And honestly, the number coming out of this summing should be pretty close to zero. If it's high, then you need to act.
it's a bit nuanced, isn't it, though? Because if you use not necessarily burstable VMs, but like 2-core VMs, then costs in Azure could be a little bit lower. It's not a rocket science calculation. It still requires somebody to sit down and calculate. The thing that I want to pass on, the advice to decision makers and heads, is to understand that unfortunately this particular point of saving is confusing. Not because on the surface it's simple. Why it's confusing is because it sits at the border between software asset management and the cloud team in organizations. And they very rarely talk to each other because they have absolutely different agendas and they're very siloed. It's rare when they cooperate. And the cloud team doesn't necessarily know what the SAM team has as the licensing bundle. So in my own experience in negotiations and Microsoft agreement renewals, so many times we had to stop procurement from canceling renewing Windows Server licenses because they just simply didn't know how many licenses they need to use in Azure. And in the same companies, in the same environments, we have seen the cloud team knowing that the company has licenses, just ticking, I have a license on every single box. So, which creates a potential for a massively non-compliant scenario where the cloud team believes there are licenses, doesn't really know how many, and ticks every box, and the software asset management team not really knowing that the cloud team needs them and how many they need, and therefore not communicating to the procurement that at the next renewal of the agreement they actually need to keep the licenses or maybe even increase the portfolio. And the most painful bit is when you cancel those renewals. In the olden days, and it still exists, it was called software assurance, but now this knowledge disappears. So I have to remind the audience that there was a thing called software assurance that you renewed on the license every 3 years. First of all, on those traditional agreements where you had software assurance, enterprise agreement, SCE, as just named by Stefan, server and cloud enrollment, those enrollments still retain the old level discounts. Microsoft famously canceled level discounts on their online services. And for some reason, the market now believes that all the level discounts disappeared. So the bigger the company, the bigger discount is. They did not disappear on the traditional licenses. So not only you pay a fraction of that cost on just renewing that little bit of software assurance, you also have, especially large enterprises, that traditional discount. This is why, as Stefan said, savings can be up to 95%. The average, please correct me if I'm wrong, Stefan, the average we calculated was 75% on Windows Server. That is the average. It's a mind-boggling saving. It's not the entire cost of the virtual machine, but it's the cost of the license attached to the virtual machine, which you can buy on average at a 1/4 of its cost. You first you ask that question: are we actually managing it correctly? Out of that question, that's the canary. Out of that question, however, stems other questions like how many do we have? Do we have the licenses? Do we need to renew? And by the way, when you cancel those renewals, don't think that everything is lost. Even via the newer CSP and MCAE still doesn't have the licenses. Even through the newer CSP type agreements, the subscription licenses still cost less than paying for the same pay-as-you-go license through Microsoft Azure. Why Microsoft did it eludes me, but it's a fact of life.
So let's maybe do an impromptu screen sharing session. I brought up the Azure pricing calculator to just point out what the cost differences of this are and to explain a little bit how we are getting to it's complicated. But maybe before I'm bringing up the screen share, you addressed a topic which I find is super important. And again, it speaks to the leader and why your cloud engineer, no matter how skilled he or she is, cannot solve this problem alone. Cooperation with the software asset management team. My experience, and please feed yours in, because I see it from the multi-year operational accompanying of the company. So I'm working with my team all the time with the cloud engineers. You more come in on the software asset management side when it's the renewal time. But what I see on the cloud engineering side is the software asset management team 5 minutes before 12 asks the cloud ops team, hey, how many licenses do we need? And then they need to drop everything and run around like crazy for 2 weeks. This is the one time every 3 years that these two teams interact. What I'm advocating is make this a bit more of a recurring exercise, and everybody is going to sleep so much better, and a ton of money will be saved in the process.
Stefan, I'll step into internal knowledge that I'm happy to disclose publicly. You are dealing with those accounts where, first of all, we're not the first year in those accounts. So they've already spoken, they learned the lesson. What I'm talking about is a broader range of clients where, for example, our cloud team is not yet present. And let me put a number just from top of my head. I would say it's not categorically that some and cloud teams don't talk, but the maturity of that particular, even knowledge that they need to talk about that particular subject once in 3 years, the penetration of that knowledge is roughly 25 to 30%. So 2/3 of the market don't do that exercise.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
So let's dive into the numbers for a second. Let me see that I bring the right one up. There should be now the Azure pricing calculator. Could you bring this to the foreground?
I need to approve it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the Azure pricing calculator. Just ask your favorite search engine about that one if you want to click around on this. And that'll show the retail prices. So out of the box, it does not know about your Mac rebates. It does not know about any other special agreements that you have with Microsoft. But you get to see what the retail prices are. And it's giving you at least a good indication of what you are paying for Azure. The thing we just talked about are Windows licenses for virtual machines. You can just add one to the estimate, click here, it jumps down, or I can scroll down a little bit. Ignore all the things about region, type, tier, category, instance size, whatever, if you are in here for the first time. What I wanted to show is that for a 2-core system, so D2 means general purpose, 2 cores, version 3. We have got other lives which talk about the soup, the letter soup, which all the clouds create. Like, what should you choose from the enormous plethora of SKUs which Azure is hiding behind a dropdown? But having 2 licenses running costs you about $70 a month. Buying a 8-core pack, which is the minimum that you need to have if you are leveraging the Azure Hybrid Use benefit, which just nulls out this meter. So you're no longer getting billed from Azure for this license included meter when your team ticks the yes, we already have a license checkbox. But you need to offset these, in this case for 2-core VM, $67. Bringing an 8-core pack, which again, what you need per Microsoft's rules as a minimum for a VM, no matter how many CPUs it brings. Buying this off a CSP, we usually see it costs about $300 to $400 a year. So let's say $30 a month, just as a rough math. It's half of that. So even on a 2-core VM, you're still saving. If you're going to something bigger, and we just take any 8-core VM, so D8, 8-core, doesn't matter which one you pick, it's $270. The same $30-ish a month for your 8-core pack, which software asset management and procurement know how to procure, is costing you $30 a month instead of $270. So this is why I say, when in doubt, just click it on all. But then there needs to be a communication facilitated between your cloud ops people who just click this on all. And they basically need to do a calculation of how many virtual machines do they have, how many cores do they have. Always take a minimum of 8 if it's a smaller number. If you take something with 16 cores, for example, now you of course need to buy 2 times 8 for Azure Hybrid Use benefit. So now it's $60 a month versus $530. Have that conversation between your cloud ops team, your software asset management team, maybe bring in procurement and buy the delta in software assurance subscriptions or perpetual licenses with software assurance, depending on which contract you are on. And your savings is cutting these costs here, in our experience, by, as Sasha said, a factor of like 3 or 4. So it's a significant one, where leadership is required to have these teams talk with each other to get it right and not to create an audit catastrophe. Because if you just tick it that, we own this, but then you don't buy the licenses, you're in a whole different world of pain when Microsoft audits you.
Yeah. It is a no-brainer, which should absolutely not be ignored. Okay, so what is the next one, Stefan? Let's talk about something else, I guess.
Another one which I have, and I need to look at my notes for a second to find my gearing again. Is a third team which you can bring into the mix, because this is something where we also see if you're only leaning on the cloud team, they are struggling to get these things happening. Imagine you're running big databases, you're running big ERP systems, like, for example, SAP. What we often see is that the people building these big databases, building the big ERP systems, they tend to pick huge servers, and they tend to pick huge and expensive premium storage. The long story short is, it doesn't always need to be that big. It doesn't always need to have the full performance. I'm not talking about production. Don't touch production first, go, please. But maybe your development environment, your system testing environment, during a time where you are not running an active development cycle, where you are not running an active load testing cycle, doesn't need to have production-like sizing. And yet often we find that your non-production systems have the same performance, have the same power as your production environments. Now, in the days where you were running in your own data center, that wasn't really an issue because everything was running off the same hardware. You usually had one storage array. You didn't have higher tier storage for production and lower tier storage for your development systems. You didn't have necessarily more expensive hardware for your production servers and for your non-production servers. So if you just look at storage, coming from it's the same type of storage for all our systems. The difference between a terabyte of premium storage and a terabyte of standard HDD storage is, if the premium SSD costs you 100%, a standard SSD costs you 70%, and a standard HDD costs you 30%. So there's a significant savings potential if you do not need a premium tier by downgrading this to the smaller tiers. And often what we also see is that unnecessary capacity is provisioned. We see 16 terabyte disks, which only have half a terabyte of storage actually required. So there's a lot of empty capacity. And now this is much harder to chase down if you do not have some affinity to the numbers, some affinity to the nitty-gritty. But asking your admin teams how much of the resources they have provisioned they are actually utilizing, working together with the cloud ops team who may have this insight. The Azure metrics provide some insight. Log analytics provides some deeper insight. And often your cloud ops team can actually tell you that there may be a disk around which is mostly on idle, not really using a lot of its space, but it's still provisioned to be super big. Reducing these disk sizes can save a lot of money. The same with virtual machines. If you have, 16 cores given to your SQL Enterprise Edition database, and you're running this in a non-production setup, then you're not just paying the 16 cores virtual machines, but also 16 cores of SQL Enterprise, which is a pretty expensive system every month. If you do not need the full power, maybe switching it down to 8 cores or even down to 4 cores during a time where it is mostly on idle could save you a lot of money, especially if you don't then need to buy the additional licenses. So this is a more tricky one, I would say, to figure out, as you will, of course, have admins defending that their systems need to be sized that way and the storage needs to be premium. But I've been through these conversations, and this is where having a good spirited exchange where you can drive a savings KPI from on top by, for example, saying, make my databases 15% less expensive. Find a way. I give you a year. Find a way to save money. People will start looking. And if you have this, just make it cheaper a bit, and 15% is totally achievable. We have been able to get way higher savings when we're really cutting away all the unnecessary capacity, all the unnecessary performance, everything you pay for, and you pay for dearly in the cloud. So this is totally doable. And then your cloud people can work together with your database people, with your ERP people to identify savings opportunities, bring these forward. And then, well, somebody needs to take the blameability away from them. This is another item where leadership is often missing, why teams dare not act, because if they then make a change, which results in savings, but then something goes wrong, so tickets are getting raised, there's a P2 incidents, for example, And then they get yelled at for having done the right thing, downsizing a system, trying to size it towards the actual requirements, but then an unforeseen usage spike happened and people were kicked off the system, or some run failed. You need to shield them from that blame as a leader, because if they get burned on this once, they will never do it again. They will size these systems for can never potentially even come close to repeating the situation ever, which basically means that you are now booking presidential suites when a single bedroom would be fully sufficient, and the company is paying for that.
You just said that it's very complicated, and I can see a lot of conflicts here. So first of all, I like the framing. I'll just ask your people to reduce the cost of your databases. As a person that likes sometimes micromanagement, I would probably complicate this question a little bit. Can you please report on the most expensive items that we consume in the cloud first?
Absolutely.
Just report that to me.
Mhm.
See the report, and then start asking questions like why? Why are we using this? Why are we using these expensive virtual machines? Can you research the potential for downgrade? But this fear that something might break is a reasonable fear. So correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things with databases in the cloud is that sometimes teams just choose a completely wrong size of the virtual machine. Microsoft has specialized, for example, specialized virtual machines that are more optimized for database usage with higher RAM but
Mhm.
fewer cores.
Yes.
That is it is becoming a more common knowledge because it's not new. But in the first year, when they just rolled out those machines, regardless of them shouting on every corner, these are specialized machines just to your database usage. It wasn't yet common knowledge, and not everybody actually procured the right SKUs. So that is something to also look into. But you're right, Stefan. I agree with you that the exec should not be asking questions around why are we using so many cores. I do agree with you that the question should be what are these most expensive resources and why? Can you
Exactly.
justify it? And maybe, by the way, instead of can you justify it, maybe we should ask the question exactly in the way you said, find me savings.
Mhm.
No,
There
there's
will
no
always be a justification why
find
you
me.
need this. But
Yeah,
asking them basically, I mean, what do nerds love to do? We love to solve tech challenges. This is why we signed up to the job. Every day starts with 10 tech challenges ahead of us. Make it the 11th challenge to find 10% savings. And then reward them for that, congratulate them, celebrate them if they're actually
I think
pulling it off.
that's the thing. Motivation is required. I remember the olden days. I'm that old when we had to optimize SQL Server estates, and in a small investment bank, we once found $2 million a year overpayments on SQL databases. Not even such a large estate because it's an expensive product. And when we ask questions along the lines of why are you using the most expensive edition, the admins would usually say, "Well, because it is the most capable." But
Mhm.
do you need that capacity? And they would start inventing all kinds of excuses. Yeah, maybe we need this synchronous replication, all throwing in those technical terms, which, because I also had the same background, I could always call BS on those. In some cases, that will be an absolutely unreasonable requirement of the third-party software. Unfortunately, nothing you can do about it, because then if you install a lesser edition, it becomes an unsupported configuration. uh,
Mhm.
but in the majority of cases, and again, to put a number on the table instead of just saying majority, 80% of those instances could be downgraded without any loss to productivity, security, resilience, or anything else. It's just people, as you just already said, they like to hedge themselves for any potential future risks. What if we need bigger capacity? What if tomorrow we'll need a specific security feature that is only available in a bigger thing? What if in the cloud, we will need tomorrow for some hypothetical spike 256 gigabyte of RAM in that machine instead of 128 gigabyte, which probably costs you not a half, a third of the cost of a bigger VM. That is a difficult question, but so just for our viewers and listeners, I must say that Stefan talks from practice. These are actual cases, and these things happen, and these expensive resources are being bought without proper planning. So yeah, absolutely ask that question.
Yeah. One more question that you can ask, again, giving you clear, actionable insights here today. This is, I guess, kind of my last canary, and then we can see if there are any questions in here or we can muse a little bit more. Is you address this topic of different virtual machine families. And indeed, when the cloud started, it was general purpose virtual machines, which meant for every CPU, you got at the time 3.5 gigabytes of RAM. Now you get 4 gigabytes of RAM. Means, on the other hand, if your database needs 256 gigabytes of RAM to run because it is a big database and it just needs that amount of memory, then if you are using a general purpose VM to host your database, 256 divided by 4, 64 cores. Every core needs a SQL license. If there's a SQL enterprise, you're paying tens of thousands of dollars per month just for the license. If these CPUs are on idle, and you could buy with, let's say, half of these. This is where Microsoft introduced, and I mean, of course, also AWS and Google have the same things, the memory optimized series. They give you 8 gigabytes of RAM per CPU. So the same requirement. You need a 256 gigs. Now you can divide by 8, and you get to build this on a 32-core virtual machine. It's half the license cost because you just went from 64 cores you need to license down to half, 32. The virtual machine is about 40% cheaper, give or take, depending on the exact model your team chooses. So they are saving both on the infra side, but this is negligible for the database. It's half the licenses which you need. You could go even further. Lately, additional generations were added, which give you 21 gigabytes of RAM per every core. So this means 256 divided by 21 is like 12-ish. So you probably need to pick the 16-core VM to do this. Again, another halving of the half with the number of licenses you need if the CPU is not terribly busy. Many teams by now have heard of the memory optimized one, where you get 8 gigabytes of RAM per core. Very few people have heard and look at the so-called FX series, Foxtrot Xavier. This is pretty new, and this is giving you the most RAM per core. So for your, doesn't actually need a whole lot of CPU power, but needs a ton of memory type workloads. This is the ideal setup, and we hardly see that. So one of the canaries that you can ask for, again, your cloud lead, they can just pull this information straight off the Azure portal, is the question for your compute cost. Please give me the percentage distribution. How much are we paying for our general purpose VMs? So this is the one with the capital D, Delta in Azure. Which percentage are we paying for our memory optimized VMs? That's the capital E, Echo in Azure. How much are we paying for burstables? Capital B, Bravo. And what are we paying for the rest? In many cases, you will see that the overwhelming majority of your cost goes towards general purpose with a little bit of memory optimized. In a really well optimized state, what I would be saying is that it should be around 30% general purpose, 30% memory optimized, 30% burstable, 10% everything else, unless you have huge specialized workloads. I mean, if you're running huge machine learning farms, a lot of your cost is going to go to GPU VMs. Then what I just told you goes out of the window. But if you're having your regular 500 business applications, some ERP systems, some big databases, basically your IT as it has grown over the decades and now has been moved into the cloud, you should be targeting to get somewhere within this 30, 30, 30, 10 otherwise mix. Your numbers will look a little different, but they shouldn't look like 95 to whatever. And often they look like the 95 to whatever. And this is, again, putting a lot of money into Azure costs, AWS costs, GCP costs. It's putting a lot of money into license costs, which I have seen, and you probably, I mean, you've been in so many more license assessments than I've been in cloud optimization exercises, Sasha. Licenses can quickly become more expensive than the pure infrastructure costs. And this is also something to look for. If your cloud team or your admin team builds systems which have too many resources, too many CPUs, then your software asset management team, your procurement team needs to buy all the licenses to keep you compliant.
Correct. Yeah.
That can be a very expensive hobby.
Speaking about the canary, I'm just imagining that particular situation. The canary actually you will see that behavior when you just ask the question for the first time. Can we have a look at our most expensive cloud items? And if people start running around panicking, that it tells you that there's probably something overlooked. I'm not saying wrong, but nobody looked at it, and it's already a good indication that there is a potential for quite immediate savings, by the way.
Yes. And the beauty about all the canaries I gave you, you will be somewhere. Maybe your IT estate is mostly running on general purpose, but now I've given you a target to manage towards. So again, for you as the leader, say, okay, we are where we are. This is how it turned out. It runs. We serve our business. Everything is kind of okay. The number of tickets which we get, the number of complaints we get, everything is in the green. Nothing is bad. But we could be over there. So let's work on a plan to get us from where we are right now towards where we want to be. This 30, 30, 30, or whatever our numbers. I mean, put 30, 30, 30 on the table and let your teams challenge it. Maybe their numbers are 40, 20, 20, whatever. I don't know. But have this conversation with them, because too often just the next system gets built, the next system gets built, the next system gets built. Heap of stuff which has been built over the past years or decade sits around. Nobody looks at it anymore because you don't have to. The cloud provider doesn't force you off the old systems. They are now beginning with the super old stuff to slowly push you off these ones. But your third generation virtual machines, which are around now for like 12 years in Azure, they are still served. They are still the ones which come up as a default. If you saw my pricing calculator session earlier, I loaded it. No pre-configuration. I didn't pre-select anything. It was showing the third generation general purpose VM. And that, by the way, is the final canary. Maybe ask your team what the generation, so the V something, V3, V4, V5, V6, V7 nowadays is. If you are seeing D series and E series with the third and fourth generation, then you're also wasting money, because these are much slower than their fifth and sixth generation counterparts. So this would be another kind of like the last extra bonus canary to throw in. And this is specifically for the Delta and the Echo virtual machines. With the burstables, it's a different numbering. With others, it's different numbering. But for these two, which have been around for most of the history of Azure, you should be on the fifth or sixth generation by now. You shouldn't be spending a ton of money on third and fourth generation anymore. So that would be the last one. Which percentage of our money are we spending on third and fourth generation? Again, general purpose and memory optimized series VMs. How can we get towards making this a zero? What is our migration modernization plan? Because that'll allow you to unlock reductions. To give just a small statement, and I'll hand it back to you, Sasha, because we need to close this one down. Our experience shows that if you're running a system on 16 cores, third generation general purpose, which needs 16 licenses for your SQL if it's a database, you can replace the system like for like with 8 cores on the fifth or sixth generation with a memory optimized VM. You do not lose performance, you do not lose capacity. You reduce the cost by 40% for the VM, and you remove half the needs for licenses.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly. Good. Again, not a very simple question along the lines of find me savings, but it's still an easy question to ask. Give us the percentage breakdown between the generation of virtual machines. And based on what we just said, Even if you're not a cloud expert, you should be able to just see that percentage, and that gives you food for thought. And if you have any additional questions, you know where to find us. So
Happy to help.
here's the QR code. You can always visit our website, ask questions, leave comments under this video, and come to our future events, and we can continue this discussion. So hopefully you learned something useful today, and hopefully it wasn't too complicated. Thank you very much. We've been with you today, Sasha and Stefan from Some Expert and Some Cloud. It's a new thing. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks on another live event. Thanks a lot. Have a good rest of the week.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks, Stefan. Bye.